In this video, I'll cover the requirements for paying prevailing wages on public works projects. You'll hear me refer to Oregon's prevailing wage rate laws as the PWR laws. The PWR laws apply to certain public works projects. I'll refer to those as PWR projects. All contractors and subcontractors on PWR projects are required to pay prevailing wages to employees. The prevailing wage is the minimum wage that must be paid on PWR projects. It is always okay to pay more than the prevailing wage rate, but not less than the prevailing wage rate. The prevailing wage rate is made up of two parts, an hourly base rate and an hourly fringe rate. It is the combination of the two that must be paid to the worker on PWR projects. Employers can meet the requirement to pay the prevailing wage rate by paying the full hourly base rate plus the full hourly fringe rate to the workers as wages. Or they may pay a portion to the worker as wages and pay a portion in the form of qualified fringe benefits, as long as the total paid in wages and benefits meets or exceeds the required prevailing wage rate. When employers contribute to qualified benefit plans, they can convert the contribution amount to an hourly rate and count that as part of the prevailing wage rate paid. This is referred to as taking a fringe credit against the hourly fringe rate owed. See Appendix A of the PWR Laws Handbook on BOLI's website for information on the requirements a benefit plan must meet to be qualified and for instructions on how to calculate the hourly fringe credit. BOLI updates the prevailing wage rates 4 times each year. Rate books are published on January 1st and July 1st, and amendments to these rates are issued on April 1st and October 1st. Making sure you use the correct rate book and possibly amendment for a particular PWR project is very important. For most types of PWR projects, the date the public agency first advertises the project's specifications for bid will determine the applicable rates to use for the duration of the project. If an amendment is in effect at the time the project is first advertised for bid, then you must use the updated rates in the amendment. For example, if a public agency first advertised a project for bid on February 4th, then the project will use the rates in the January 1st rate book. If a project was first advertised for bid on April 7th, it will use the January 1st rate book and the April 1st amendment. You can find all of BOLI's rate books and amendments on our website at this link. At this same link, you'll also find a helpful video titled How to Look Up a Prevailing Wage Rate. This video gives step-by-step instructions that will help you correctly look up prevailing wage rates. While the date the public agency first advertises the project's specifications for bid will generally determine which rate book will be used on the project, there are a few exceptions to this. If the project uses a construction manager general contractor, referred to as a CMGC, the rates will be set differently. And if the project is a public-private venture, the rates will be set differently. Finally, if the project is subject to both the state and federal prevailing wage rate laws, the rates may be set differently. If you are not sure which rates to use on a PWR project, you can check with the public agency or prime contractor for that project. The PWR laws require that contractors and subcontractors pay workers on PWR projects not less than the applicable prevailing wage rate. A worker is defined as a person whose duties are manual or physical in nature, as opposed to a person whose duties are mental, professional, or managerial. In other words, any person on a PWR project site who is performing manual labor is a worker and must be paid at the appropriate prevailing wage rate for all time worked on the project site. The term worker might also apply to owners, managers, and working supervisors in certain circumstances. The PWR rules require that people who spend part of the workweek performing mental or managerial duties and part of the workweek performing work that is manual in nature will be considered a worker if they spend more than 20% of the week performing manual labor. When an owner, manager, or working supervisor is a worker on a PWR project, they must be paid not less than the appropriate prevailing wage rate for the time spent performing manual labor on the PWR project site. For example, Joe is a working supervisor who worked 100 hours in the week. Of this time, Joe spent 3 hours performing manual labor on a PWR project site. Joe also spent 47 hours performing manual labor on a private job. Joe spent the remaining 50 hours in the week performing managerial duties. In this week, Joe spent 50 out of 100 hours performing manual labor, or 50% of the week. This means for PWR purposes, Joe is a worker this week. And as a worker, Joe must be paid the appropriate prevailing wage rate for the 3 hours of manual labor he worked on the PWR project site. While the 47 hours of manual labor on the private project do not have to be paid at a prevailing wage rate, those hours do count toward the threshold of 20% of the work week. When looking at prevailing wage rates, you'll see there are different rates for different types of work performed. Workers on PWR projects must be paid the appropriate prevailing wage rate based on the duties they are actually performing on the PWR project site, not according to a title given to them by the employer. For example, a worker may have the title of laborer, but if the worker is operating an excavator on a PWR project, the work must be paid at the appropriate power equipment operator rate. For assistance in selecting the correct classification for workers on a PWR project, see Boley's publication titled Definitions of Covered Occupations for Public Works Contracts in Oregon, which can be found at this link. Employees may work in more than one classification on PWR projects. When this happens, it is the employer's responsibility to track the time spent working in each classification and pay the worker accordingly. If this is not done, the worker must be paid at the highest rate earned for all hours worked in the week. The appropriate prevailing wage rate must be paid for all hours worked on a PWR project site. This is referred to as the site of work. The site of work is the physical place where the construction called for in the project contract will remain after the work is complete. Generally, work performed off of the project site does not have to be paid at a prevailing wage rate. The exception to this is for work performed on sites that are dedicated to the PWR project. A dedicated site could include borrow pits, batch plants, tool yards, and other similar locations, provided they are within a reasonable distance to the PWR project site. On a dedicated site, workers must be paid the appropriate prevailing wage rate for all manual labor performed. Additionally, the travel time between the dedicated site and the PWR project site must be paid at the appropriate prevailing wage rate. Other travel time between a PWR project site and a non-dedicated site does not have to be paid at a prevailing wage rate. Delivery personnel are owed prevailing wages under certain circumstances. If delivery personnel are employed by a contractor or a subcontractor, they must be paid the appropriate prevailing wage rate if they spend more than 15 minutes performing manual labor on the PWR project site. Such manual labor includes driving a vehicle and loading or unloading materials. If delivery personnel are employed by a commercial supplier, they must be paid the appropriate prevailing wage rate if they spend more than 20% of their work week performing manual labor on the PWR project site. A commercial supplier, in this instance, is a business that simply delivers material to a PWR project site. They do not install the materials on the project site. If a commercial supplier installs materials in addition to delivering them, they are considered a contractor or subcontractor on the project, and their delivery personnel must be paid the appropriate prevailing wage rate if they spend more than 15 minutes performing manual labor on the PWR project site. Oregon law requires employers to establish and maintain regular paydays. Paydays may not be more than 35 days apart or more than 35 days from the date the employee began working. Employers may establish regular pay periods that are more frequent than this, but not less frequent. When the hourly fringe portion of the prevailing wage rate is paid directly to the worker, it must be paid to the worker as wages on the regularly scheduled payday. I hope this information on paying prevailing wages is helpful to you. Need help? Don't worry, we're here to assist you with any questions you may have. Give us a call or send us an email. We look forward to hearing from you.